Yeah, we're talking Christian McCaffrey, fantasy football. What's he going to look like in 2020? This is Get Paid, a special edition, a fantasy football almanac edition. Just reminding our audience that the fantasy football almanac and draft guide is out there. Quick little plug for this as we jump into the show. Why is the almanac good? Well, first of all, you get free updates. So if you buy now, you actually get more content throughout the season. You also get more access to our mathematically driven sleepers. Everybody knows when you research sleepers, it's all the same sleepers. You go to a website, everybody's talking about the same people. What happens on draft day? Those guys are overhyped and they are overdrafted. We use our math and our projections to predict sleepers and predict risk players. We tell you who to draft, who to avoid in the top rounds and in the late rounds. So, yeah, it's really good. But this is, like I said, we're doing something different on Get Paid now. As listeners of the show know, Brad is more of a gambling expert, and I'm more of the fantasy football guy. So while we're talking about fantasy football previews and everything, we're going to be bringing on different guests. Primarily, our primary guest is going to be David G. from Guru Fantasy World. He also contributes to Underdog TV. You may have seen him if you look at the channel. Once again, it's youtube.com/theunderdog. David G., how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to get our first co-podcast getting going.
Yeah, co-podcast, co-video, all that stuff. And, what we're going to be doing in these series, these micro podcasts, of course, we're going to be still doing the stuff with me and Brad. But, throughout the week, I'm trying to release one or two of these in a given week. And the idea is to dive into a player. And, I say Christian McCaffrey. And let me throw this back to you, David. So I say Christian McCaffrey, and when I started writing the book, writing the almanac, going through, the rankings and everything, basically what's out there, what's the consensus, he was far and away the number one player. And I'm going to paint a picture for you. So I do my own analytics, my projections that are based on individual player matchup and their NFL schedule. When the numbers came back, Christian McCaffrey, for me, was the number 4th projected player in terms of points scored, which I thought was interesting. Then I looked back right before I published, and Saquon Barkley had actually jumped him in the consensus. But what are your thoughts today? Who's your number 1 running back today? Is it Christian McCaffrey or is it someone else?
I think it's pretty hard to make it anyone but Christian McCaffrey.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking about last year he scored, 470 fantasy points.
Yes.
Second place was Aaron Jones, who had 314 fantasy points.
And Aaron Jones had 19 touchdowns or something, fueling those, whatever touchdowns. And
it was 15 plus. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah,
but either way.
Yeah, either way. And so I agree with you. So I mentioned, right, and this is kind of what my almanac does. It takes the projections, but it also normalizes them over basically draft strength. So we look at draft tiers, we do the mock drafts. We're not really heavy into mock draft season yet. David, I know you're a monster with mock drafts, so I can't wait. One of the things I want to do with you is bring you on and do some real live. We'll get in the same draft room at ESPN and start doing those things. I think that'll be fun. But Christian McCaffrey, I agree. And he ended up being the number 1 player on my board simply because, who do you rank ahead of him? And Saquon Barkley, which we'll cover on another episode, has his questions, and Christian McCaffrey has his. So I'm going to hit you with this, all right? This is the angle of the book, and I haven't sent it to you yet. It's shame on me. But I'll send it to you, and you can kind of read through my write-ups of these players as we prepare for these things. But here's the thing. Okay, so Matt Rhule comes into Carolina. And here's my whole theory on Christian McCaffrey. We all know he's a monster. We all know if he continues on this path, he is, a surefire Hall of Famer if he can stay healthy and keep doing this volume. I mean, he's a monster, right? We haven't seen this since maybe Marshall Faulk, this two-way threat that can get you 1,000 yards in both areas. But Matt Rhule comes in. His time in Baylor, he's kind of a pass-first guy, almost like a Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona. Not to say he doesn't utilize the run game, but what he does is he uses a lot of players and a lot of committee. So my thought is, as I'm analyzing this offense, I mean, every piece of data is saying Matt Rhule is not going to use Christian McCaffrey as much as Ron Rivera and the old coaching staff did. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I had this thought that over the last 2 years with Ron Rivera, he's basically been fighting for his job for 2 years, right? And you got, was it Scott Turner? Norv Turner's son. I think it's Scott Turner. Running the offense, and the Turners always use the bell cow running back approach. Let's run our running backs to death, which is great. So you have those things going on. And Rivera, I'm thinking, is like, I need to win at all costs to keep my job. I'm going to run Christian McCaffrey to the ground. Well, now Matt Rhule comes in. He's like, well, look, we're rebuilding here. I want to compete in 2 or 3 years. I want to keep Christian McCaffrey's legs fresh. So what do you think about that angle, David?
I definitely agree with you to start. But when we look at it, he's gonna regress, almost 100% fact. There's been, since 2012, 5 guys who have scored 400 fantasy points. Peyton Manning in 2013 scored 442. Next year, 312. We had David Johnson in 2016, scored 407 fantasy points. Next year, he played 1 game. Then we had Mahomes, 2018, of course, last year, had the injuries. He only scored 292 fantasy points.
Right.
So McCaffrey's almost 1,000% going to regress. But I really have a hard time entertaining any non-injury related debate about him being number 1. Because like I said, we look at second place, 314 fantasy points. I'm no mathematician, but that tells me McCaffrey could have scored 150 less fantasy points last year and still been our RB1. I mean, you could have shaved 50 receptions, 500 yards, and 5 touchdowns off his total.
Yeah,
he still would have been RB1. So I do see that side of the coin where you're right. Matt Rhule is probably going to spread it around. There are plenty of playmakers in that offense. DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel. They just added Robbie Anderson. So we're going to see him regress a little bit, but it's hard for me to really see a non-injury situation unless, like the guy you mentioned before, Saquon Barkley, really, he's the only one I can really entertain to be putting ahead of McCaffrey.
Right, and so, and again, we'll do Saquon, but speaking about him quickly, I guess this is to tease our next little episode that we do. Saquon has his own questions. Jason Garrett's taken over the offensive coordinator role. They have Judge coming in there as the head coach, installing the new thing. They get Dion Lewis in free agency. Not that I think Dion Lewis is a real threat to Saquon's touches or anything, but really, I mean, the New England Patriot way, where Judge came from, right, is running back by committee. Of course, Jason Garrett hasn't really run a committee, and I do think that Garrett is going to have total control over kind of offensive personnel use. But remember, Garrett is more – he likes power running backs. That's kind of his background. Like, even in his playing days with Emmitt Smith, you look at, DeMarco Murray back in the day for Dallas, and then, of course, Ezekiel Elliott. And what I noticed with Dallas, I'm giving too much away for the next episode. What I noticed with Dallas in the last few years, though, is they didn't use Ezekiel Elliott in the passing game as much as I would have, and that's kind of Saquon's bread and butter. But I'm going to put a pin in Saquon because I want another episode. I don't want to blow it all now. Christian McCaffrey, I agree, man. And one of the things that the book does, and by the way, there's a link below that you can click on if you're interested. Just click on the link and look at it. It's on Amazon. You can read more about what the book's about. But one of the things we do is it's new this year. It's called Points Above Replacement, trademark pending. I'm not going to let anybody else steal it like they stole my opportunity rankings. Trademark pending. It's but no, seriously, fantasy points above replacement. So you mentioned like he's 150 points higher than the next guy, where you're looking at 15 fantasy weeks against the next guy. He's 10 points more valuable, and that's against the second place. So our points above replacement doesn't work quite like that. It's like the fantasy. I'm sorry, it's like Major League Baseball's WAR. It's about wins over replacement, fantasy points over replacement, and basically what you're saying is his points above replacement, somebody you could acquire, pick up, and stream, is astronomical, right? Another guy that we could look at is Patrick Mahomes a couple years ago, or Lamar Jackson in 2019, where his points at quarterback above replacement was insane, right? And so that's kind of what we look at. But to your point, I come away with two. I think we agree here, David. I come away with 2 things here, though. Who do you rank ahead of him? Saquon, is he in there? I'm going to throw another name out there, Dalvin Cook. Injuries concern me, but Gary Kubiak taking over the offense. Stefanski's gone. The offense is going to be the same, but a little bit different. I think Dalvin Cook could have a career year. Stefanski going over. I know everybody's talking Kareem Hunt. Stefanski going over to Cleveland. I think Nick Chubb could have a career year, and he had a baller year last year. So there are different guys that I think are going to have value. What I think we've seen, though, is a close of the gap because of some of this stuff. If I had the number 1 pick, as I say it today, and I might change my opinion, I still take Christian McCaffrey because he's the safest pick to me, right? He's the safest guy. Even if he regresses, he's still likely to be in the top 2 in the running backs. Saquon Barkley, is he going to catch the ball less? Kareem Hunt, I don't think he's going to really hurt Nick Chubb's value as much as the fantasy community says, but he could. That's a risk, right? Dalvin Cook, look, I think he has every opportunity to be a monster. Could get injured. He's always injured, right? Who do you pick that's more durable and better? I don't see it. But if you're a dynasty player, I don't know if you're in any dynasty players, David. I love dynasty. If you're a dynasty player, I don't know if there's a better time to trade Christian McCaffrey. What do you think about that?
I was actually about to lead right into that.
Yeah.
I think you bring up a great point. The gap right now, the perceived gap, is probably a little bit bigger than the actual gap going forward. Like we said, McCaffrey's coming off a 471-point fantasy. That's just unheard of. And if you look back just the last year, Saquon Barkley was pretty much the consensus number one going forward, right? It was not many people were arguing with that. So I think we're kind of letting that recency bias kind of affect our perception of that gap a little bit. You're still taking McCaffrey number one, but if you can look into some sort of trade, right, where you can maybe swap McCaffrey for Barkley and pick up some sort of legitimate extra piece, I think that's definitely worth looking into, right? Because McCaffrey's value, it's probably only going to go down from here.
Yeah.
This is probably peak selling season for McCaffrey.
You know who I'd look at? This is just, I mean, again, I'm just looking at kind of the par, and we'll get in par of points above replacement, fantasy par, and we'll look into that. But I've looked at the numbers, and, you know, we're going to still be tweaking as we get more data, as we start to see, you know, what people are doing, what teams are doing, what these new schemes are doing in training camp. But, you know, I look at a guy, everybody's talking about Michael Thomas, right? And his par, by the way, is huge. I think he might even be the number one person in terms of par. But I look at a guy like Tyreek Hill, right? So last year, and we'll probably do another episode on this because I think he's a really interesting player. I've been high on Hill for a couple years. You have Patrick Mahomes, but remember, Hill tweaked his hamstring before, I think it was a hamstring, but I think he tweaked his hamstring in the first game, missed a few weeks. By the time he comes back, I think he had one game, if I'm not mistaken, it was against Baltimore, and he caught 2 touchdowns. Then Patrick Mahomes starts to get that ankle injury. Then he hurts his kneecap, and he comes back. So you have Hill, who was a productive player in spite of all this stuff, but he was not at full capacity last year because of the rotation between his injuries and then Patrick Mahomes' injuries. He could come back and explode. So if I'm a dynasty player, and I could trade Christian McCaffrey for, you know, if that perceived gap like you're talking about, a guy like Tyreek Hill at wide receiver, and I have different opinions, I know, but could I trade McCaffrey for like a Tyreek Hill and Dalvin Cook? I think that would be a compelling offer. If you were the owner, well, what do you think about that trade, first of all? Do you think that's decent value back from your point of view? Like if you had McCaffrey.
If you're getting Madison, you got to get Madison.
Yeah.
Anything with Dalvin Cook, it's got to be a package deal with Madison.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's bad offer at all. If anything, I might say the Dalvin Cook and Tyreek Hill side might actually ask for McCaffrey and then a second piece.
Right.
But if you're able to get Madison, I don't think that's a bad trade. Not at all.
I agree, and one of the and that's a great point because I've been talking about Minnesota. But if anybody's read my guide, you know, for the past couple of years, I was super high on Madison. Madison, I think, was actually my favorite in terms of talent because, you know, we do the scouting, right? We do actually watch film and all this stuff. My favorite running back coming out of the draft was Madison, but he had Dalvin Cook in front of him. And so my thinking with Gary Kubiak is Minnesota running back. That's how I look at it. Now, Dalvin Cook is obviously like the guy, but I look at it like Minnesota running back. If Dalvin Cook goes down, Madison's going to be fantastic in this offense. And I don't think that, you know, he might give you a little bit less in the receiving game, obviously, but I don't think you're missing a beat. I think you're getting over 100 yards a game and a touchdown every game that Madison's playing if Cook is out. So I agree with that. If you're going to make that investment in Cook and if you're going to invest in him early in the draft, look, his injury history speaks for itself. You got to get Madison. And I would say the same is true with Chubb, too. You know, I'm high on Chubb. I've historically been high on Chubb because I like his running. I think as a running back, physical talent, I don't know that if I was an NFL franchise, I don't know that I'd want anybody else other than Chubb. You can make an argument certainly for Ezekiel Elliott. You can make the argument, I think, for Christian McCaffrey. Saquon is a little bit of a smaller body, so I don't know that I would go for him. So anyway, I'm saying like physical talent matters.
I want to cut in real quick too, if you don't mind, because you bring up something, and it is one selling point to make that swap. Like you mentioned, Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb. These are guys with clear backups, right? Like you can go get Kareem Hunt, you can get Alexander Madison, you can get Tony Pollard, and then if one of these guys go down, you at least have insurance. If Christian McCaffrey goes down, are you rostering his backup? Who is his backup?
I think at this point it's
Reggie Bonifant. I mean, come on, nobody's rostering Reggie Bonifant unless you're in an extremely deep league.
Yep.
And if you are, do you know what you're going to get out of him if McCaffrey goes down? So I think that's one selling point to maybe try and make that swap to get another elite back who has a handcuff. Mm-hmm. Maybe see if you can get some other sort of wide receiver or other position as well.
Yeah, and that's, again, I'm just coming up with different ideas as we talk about this, but that's an interesting one. Is the running back? I guess you can call it the handcuff, but I would call it a running back stack. Like I said, Minnesota, to me, I love Dalvin Cook's talent. I love Alexander Madison's talent. To me, it's Minnesota running back because if Cook goes down, Madison's getting the carries. Another decent one, although I'm not as enamored with it, is New Orleans because I think Latavius Murray's underrated, and he has been. Speaking of the Vikings, right, a former Viking. Kamara has had recent injury history. I like Murray, dude. The dude runs. Hard. He gets good yards at a good clip. There are these different guys, but then you look at another one, like let's look at Houston. Do you roster Duke Johnson at this point when all the talk is about David Johnson being a 3-down back and they basically traded DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson? Like that dude better be on the field all the time if you trade David or DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson. So that'll be an interesting one to talk about too. But yeah, I mean, dynasty-wise, like you said, man, I think you hit the nail on the head. Christian McCaffrey's value is never going to be higher. He might sustain it, but it's never going to be higher. And as a dynasty player, you're basically looking at your players like stocks. That's another thing kind of we do in the book is what stock is on the rise, what stock is stable, what's your volatility, what are the penny stocks that could really vault this season. And I think Christian McCaffrey is kind of like Disney during the pandemic. It's a bedrock stock, but it's likely to come down, and it's still going to be valuable, but it's likely to come down a little bit. So very interesting. So I think we could probably call it there. Once again, Fantasy Football Almanac and Draft Guide. Check it out. We approach this thing different from any other publication. I read all the publications. We do it different, and we do that on purpose too. So it's analytically driven. I watch over 1,000 hours of football every single year. That's every game plus some because I go back and rewatch some stuff. I do all that, so we go deeper on sleepers, deeper on risk players, deeper on offensive scheme, basically scouting as well, so we know where the opportunity is. Click the link below for more information. It's on Amazon. You can buy it from there. David, Guru Fantasy World, what's the full website there for anybody who wants to check it out?
Full website is gurufantasyworld.blogspot.com. Basically like your regular fantasy website, except I'm also trying to create world's largest free encyclopedia of strategies.
Awesome.
So we have a lot of strategy pieces on there, help you kind of figure out ins and out of the game. And we also got bad takes on players too. So
that sounds good. And I'll have a link for that as well on the bottom. So check that out. Check David out. He's awesome. What's your Twitter, by the way? What's your Twitter handle for the crowd?
It's at Guru Fantasy World with no O in world, so WRLD.
Yep. Got to run out. You run out of space sometimes in the Twitter.
Yeah, I was going. Hey, it works though because I'm playing on that Juice World.
Yeah,
so I'm like, that kind of fits a little bit,
Yep. All right, well, we'll be back with another episode probably about Saquon Barkley in these next kind of little micro-burst episodes. Hope you enjoyed it. Christian McCaffrey, still probably our consensus number one, at least on this podcast. But if you're in a dynasty or a deeper keeper league, I think now is the time where you can think or explore about trading him. But if you keep him, hey, no argument there, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And you better get something really, really, really good back that you love if you trade him because he is a monster. There's no denying that. Hey, once again, David, thanks. Everybody out there, hey, go out, make some bets, play some fantasy, and get paid.